For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle's so thick, even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. All right, episode 46 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Here we go. I want to remind you, please subscribe to the podcast if you're enjoying the show, wherever you're listening. And also, you can find out more at buffaloroamer.com. Today's podcast, Scott Oath is on the show. Scott is the author of Bull Moose Patrol. It's a website, blog. He does trips as well, and he's a paddler, loves canoeing in particular. He's an outdoorsman. He dabbles in some bushcraft, so we talk canoeing, outdoors. I met Scott at a outdoor convention, some of the ones here in the Midwest. He is a speaker and likes spreading the good word of the outdoors. So without further ado, Scott Oath of Bull Moose Patrol on episode 46 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Scott, how's it going, man?
Going well. Excited to have a chance to catch up. Saw your presentation, when was that? The Fall Expo in Minneapolis, and we chatted for a little bit afterwards. So I'm looking forward to the conversation to hear more.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Hopefully, we got a lot to talk about. You'll be back at that Spring Expo in Minneapolis. Probably will have already happened by the time this podcast drops, I would guess. But yeah, those expos are always fun. I had Cliff Jacobson on an earlier podcast, as you were there for one of the live recordings with Bob O'Hara. So it's kind of a small world, and a lot of interesting folk who do those different those expo scenes, right?
Yeah, it's fun. There's I've been going to those events for a long time, and just a wealth of knowledge. I mean, so much, and there's a lot of people who show up who I've never heard of before, and you listen like, holy smokes, they did some amazing trips or whatever. But it's kind of like I almost view those events as my continuing ed or something like that in the outdoor space, because it's fun, gets you excited about what's coming up. And you always pick up some new stories, new ideas of places to go, techniques, and there's some really good ones. So I mean, for years and years, I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, probably not too far from you, and the earliest ones were Canoecopia. So I started going in the maybe early 80s, mid 80s, something like that, with my dad. Our birthday is a day apart, and our birthday weekend always fell right over Canoecopia, so that was a special event. We'd go there, and so I was a little kid, and we would go to that. And I remember seeing Cliff Jacobson and Bob O'Hara speaking at those events. And Dad, he loved canoeing, and we just thought that was great. And maybe we'd pick out something like a life jacket or a paddle would be our birthday present that we'd pick out at that event. So that event's been fantastic. I've been going to it feels like my whole life. Midwest Mountaineering here in the Twin Cities, a great little independent outdoor shop, runs this big expo in the spring and the fall, and they do a really good job of getting speakers that are lined up with the seasonality, what's coming up. And yeah, they have gear on sale, lots of vendors, like a big circus tent with stuff on sale, but it's all weekend long. It's like going to a conference. There'll be multiple different presentations every hour. So that's a great one. Just a week ago, I went to the Far North Symposium, which is here in the Twin Cities, and that's sponsored by the Minnesota Canoe Association. And that one's a little bit more, kind of niche, small group. Of Bob O'Hara, who you mentioned, he's the ringleader. He's the godfather. That's his baby, and he does a great job putting that on and brings in people. And I mean, even that one, I love wilderness adventure and big time trips, but sometimes I sit there and scratch my head and think, you guys are crazy when I hear about some of these trips. But that's great. And then, I've had a lifelong involvement in scouting, and there's some events like that on the scout side too that are fun to go to. So much. I travel for some, but yeah, I love that stuff.
Me too, man. Me too. And like you said, it's like kind of continuing ed, or it's like it just like revamps, stokes the fire. It's like
Totally.
anytime
Yeah.
I go to one of those, as you mentioned, there's all different kind of speeches from people doing crazy expeditions to practical stuff like how to set up a better tarp, or all different kinds of stuff. A lot of your speeches involve a lot of the practical stuff that you can take away and bring out on the trip. So on the trail. Yeah, they're awesome. I love those. What were any interesting tidbits from the far north synopsis or thoughts?
Oh yeah, from far north. Let's see. So I actually this year only made it for half a day. I came in at lunch. I had some stuff I had to do in the morning, but there's a really cool group called Les Voyageurs out of St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is, I think, about an hour and a half from where I am in the Twin Cities area, a little northwest. And I believe the idea is there was a high school teacher, Fred Rupp, I think was his name, who started this program a long time ago, 30 years ago, something like that, maybe more. And he would take high school students who wanted to go on a canoe trip in the north, and he would, he'd train them, and they would plan the trip and plan their food and practice paddle strokes and learn first aid and learn navigation. And so, it's kind of like a scouting program, or maybe some of the canoe camp programs, but local high school kids. And he kept going further and further away, a lot of stuff in Northwest Ontario and Arctic trips. And so a new fellow's taken over that program, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but he kind of gave an update and talked about what they did during COVID to keep the program alive and what they're up to now. And it was great. They sort of rerouted. They did the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, and then they went to Alaska. So I think that Northern Forest Canoe Trail was 2020. Then 2021, they went to Alaska and talked about their trips there. But, really cool seeing what they're doing with that program. There's some really good stuff.
Awesome.
Vern Fish, if I'm trying to remember the name, talked about Wabakimi, Northwest Ontario, and some of the rivers skirting that area. So yeah, fantastic stuff. Gets you fired up to
all kinds of great stuff. You mentioned going to Canoecopia with your dad as a kid. How did you get into the outdoor world and the canoeing? And you're into some of the survivalist and bushcraft stuff as well. Like, how did you get tied into all of this? Give me the rundown.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's part of it, and it's hard to. There's no real pinpoint. Like, this is what started it. My dad liked the outdoors. He had been in Scouts. He was an Eagle Scout. My uncle was too, and so my dad liked doing that kind of stuff. He loved canoeing and time on the water. And so he liked doing that. My mom had grown up on a farm in Iowa, and she talked about her brothers, and we'd visit the farm, and, they didn't have Game Boys or whatever kids play these days. They hunted and trapped and stuff like that when they weren't working the farm. So I kind of grew up in that environment. And also in Madison, the home I grew up in, I was lucky. Right out my back door was the University of Wisconsin Arboretum. So special place. And the elementary school I went to was actually called Aldo Leopold Elementary School, named after the famous naturalist who was a professor at the University of Wisconsin and father of modern wildlife management, and wrote the Sand County Almanac and all that. So there was a lot of influences like that, but that was my backyard. I could go literally right out my back door, and there's a conservation park with a railroad corridor, and I could hike down that a little ways and hop a fence and be in the Arboretum, which the story I'd heard is, it's not like a boutique garden type Arboretum. This is a wild Arboretum, and Leopold had helped design that to try and recreate the different biomes that were present in the state of Wisconsin at the time settlers came in. So there was prairie and grasslands, there was pine forest and conifers, there was deciduous oak hardwoods, and you could hike through and actually take a tunnel underneath the highway and come up on the other side where the Arboretum continued and hike over to Lake Wingrad. So I spent, countless hours as a kid tromping around in there and building forts and doing all the stuff kids do in the woods. And that was my playground. I could actually walk to Leopold Elementary School on the train tracks through the woods, which sometimes when I'm talking to my mom now, she just shakes her head like, I can't believe I let you do that. It was like an elementary school kid, but that was how I'd walk to school or often walk home. And so I did that. And then I did have a great experience in Boy Scouts. So I got in Scouts, and I know some people have different results. I think I've come to believe it's one of those things, like a lot of things in life, you get out of it what you put into it, and it's all about the people who are involved. And luckily I had a great group of friends, had some great leaders who volunteered a lot of time and energy, and it was just a fantastic program. And I loved the time outdoors. I liked the scouting skills. I became addicted to achievement and chasing badges and all that stuff. And we did great trips. I mean, we were really out camping every month, and whitewater rafting, bicycle camping. And then as we got a little bit older, we started doing the high adventure trips. So we alternated going to the Boundary Waters or driving out west and backpacking in the mountains in Wyoming. And so that was a great experience. And we did it all self-outfitted too, meaning using our own gear, planned our own food, planned everything. It wasn't through like one of the camp programs. So that was all, it was all my background. I had a good buddy who we spent a lot of time, hunting in our free time, and just a lot of those influences. I always loved history. And so I might be a little bit different than some folks in that way. For me, like history and the outdoors are sort of this natural tie. I'm always interested in traditional skills and how people lived. And I really love learning about the frontiersmen and Daniel Boone and mountain men and the voyageurs and old time lumberjacks and all that stuff. And so for me, that's kind of part of it. And that's part of my style of the outdoors at this point still, is I like traditional skills. I like the natural materials. I think a lot of those ways still work, and a lot of them are very rewarding because they're using your hands and they're understanding the environment, really working with it. And I definitely try and do that type of stuff in a very thoughtful and respectful way, so I'm not harming or desecrating any campgrounds or leaving any trace. But I do like that stuff. So yeah, long answer, Will, but I think it's just a combination of things. And I got really involved in sports. I was in sports in school, and that was a great thing. And, spent a lot of time, volleyball was my thing, long time playing volleyball. And I would still do outdoors stuff. But as I got further and further along and the injuries kept piling up and I was getting older, I could kind of see, this isn't good. This run is coming to an end. And I really started doing more of the outdoor stuff. And I think I sort of consciously knew I need something to help wean me off. There's going to be a big gap in my life once the sports thing comes to an end, a big hole where I'd spent my time and energy in my social network. And so I started ramping up the outdoor stuff pretty big time, probably 10-15 years ago. And I'd say it worked. I was able to step out of the sports passion, the volleyball, where I'd spent so much time and energy, and was very excited. I was graduating into something instead of just giving something else up.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's great. And just a heads up, I think sometimes your mic is rubbing against your collar there just a little bit.
Sorry about that.
Hey, no problem. It's not a big deal, but just to keep in mind.
Yeah, you bet.
But yeah, that's great. And it sounds like a great path. All kinds of questions I have to dive into there, but one of them is, what was, or do you have a memory of your first kind of solo endeavor? It sounded like a lot of the scout stuff that you did was kind of DIY, like group stuff, which is more or less the same style. But like for me, I have one because I grew up in a canoe camp as a kid, and I remember I had a trip when I was 18, and we went to the Wind Rivers on a backpacking trip, and it was right after I graduated high school, and it was like the first time where it was like, holy cow, I don't have to do this trip by these rules. It's just me and my 3 idiot buddies picking a route, doing everything wrong. But that was like a whole new world for me. And I'm curious if you have a memory of something like that.
Yeah, maybe a few things. When I was younger, I would go hiking in those woods behind my house by myself quite a bit, and cross country skiing in the winter. And I was the first kid I knew to get a mountain bike. I think it was like 1982 or something like that. And I'd ride those trails. And so I did a fair amount of that stuff solo. And my dad and I and one of my good friends were into bow hunting when I was in high school. And that involved a lot of solitary time, sitting very quietly by yourself in the woods, a lot of good time for reflection. So there's a few of those, but I guess I'd say it was probably maybe after college when I'd kind of come back and I was working and I was looking for little spots of outdoor time here and there, that I would, at that time I was borrowing my dad's canoe, or I'd go on a, hike here or there. And I started doing more things like that, or shooting off for a little overnight camping trip, just to get outside, sometimes not even that far away. Didn't have a lot of time, didn't have much in the way of gear. And really, despite, the scouting background, all that stuff, which is great, didn't have the same level of sort of knowledge or, things like that I have now. But I still love that feeling of, hey, even just getting out in the country a little bit, get a fire going, sit around there, and have some quiet, look at the stars and sleep in the fresh air.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. And tie in Bull Moose Patrol as well. How long have you been doing the blog and being a little more on the forefront side rather than the just going out for your own enjoyment for the weekend with a buddy? Because you do the blog and different courses and speeches at these expos that we've talked about. So how did that all come to play?
Yeah, I think 2014 was the official start date of Bull Moose Patrol, and a couple pieces I think came together on that. I had been doing a lot of instruction and training in the high adventure program and in Boy Scouts, organizing events or teaching events. And so there's some of that. And I was putting together trips for friends, some of these things I was doing anyway. We were kind of organizing things. So there was some of these things I was doing already. And I'd say some of my friends from my volleyball life were interested in doing more outdoorsy stuff, like, oh, I'd love to go to the Boundary Waters, can take me there sometime. Can we go to the Boundary Waters? Or, man, you go winter camping? That's crazy. Can you take me sometime? Or how do you do that? You're nuts. And I explain and say, oh, well, that sounds kind of neat. Maybe we should do that. So I was organizing group trips, either, independently or in conjunction with other people. And I was kind of looking at what I was doing in Scouts and thought, well, there's a lot of people who didn't have that background, or they don't have that tie now, who might be interested in doing this stuff. And I think also a big thing is I started taking some trips out to Maine for canoe trips. I had a canoe trip planned in Canada, and the people I was going with ended up having to bail on me. And I had the time blocked off on my calendar. I thought, well, I want to do something. And there was a guy I'd been following online, Tim Smith, with Jack Mountain Bushcraft out in Maine. And I happened to see, he was running a week-long river guide training course, that same time slot I had blocked off. So I went out there and went through his program, had a great time. I'd always been curious about Maine. That was my first trip there. I always kind of thought, it's probably a lot like northern Minnesota. Why would I go out there? I went out there and thought it is a lot like northern Minnesota, but what I kind of came to is like, if you like northern Minnesota, you're really going to like Maine. There's a lot of wild land. It is a bit different, that it's more river environment. It's just a lot that I really liked about it, including really sort of the culture of it. I view it as like a sister state to Minnesota, and it is very much a canoeing state. There's canoeing culture. It's a little bit more old school, a little bit more traditional. And one of the things that's different is, like here in Minnesota in the Boundary Waters, you hear someone who's a guide. Most ones I know, it's like, well, it means they work for like the scout camp or a Y camp or a church camp, and they're typically young, and it's like a seasonal thing, and they're leading youth groups, on a canoe trip or something like that. That's wonderful. In Maine, I saw a lot more. It's a different thing. There's a lot of people, it's a family business. It's a lifelong business. Their dad and grandpa had been guides, and the state actually licenses the guides, and they keep it pretty strict. They have a fairly challenging exam process, and they flunk about half the people. But a lot of them, it's like a cottage industry, and it's a small business where, maybe they're doing something else, but then they run these trips or they teach these classes. So I was kind of intrigued. I was like, that's kind of an interesting model. I kind of like that. So I think that was kind of the genesis of it. And I think I just sort of had the urge to do something. I was following some blogs. I really like some blogs and, whatever, I guess maybe YouTube or podcast. I don't know if I was listening to any of those at that time, but there was just kind of a desire to create something, some place, instead of hashing it out on forums or chat rooms about, your trip or your favorite canoe, or someone's like, why don't I just create a blog? And the blog, so it's blog, right? Write about trips, I write about skills. It's supposed to be sort of a digital guidebook, a lot of how-to stuff. but I also do, guide trips. And what I really like doing is I enjoy learning technical skills. And I really like teaching them. So I found it's fun for me to create experiences for people, let them have a fun, interesting experience that they might not otherwise do for themselves, show them how to have a good time, be safe, stay warm, stay dry. I really like that stuff. So
awesome,
where it all
man.
came from.
Yeah, that's great, and it's interesting, and I've loved following your stuff on social media, even just the stuff you post. I, as a lover of canoes myself, obviously, and I'm kind of in the same vein where, like, the Voyager, the Frontiersman, like that era and that kind of style, like, just resonates with me. And seems like you're always tied in and posting, like, a lot of the history and, like, the ties to that era, which I always find interesting.
Yeah, there's I don't know if you've ever seen this fellow, Billy Rioux. He's from Quebec. He's a really cool guy. He makes some great videos. He's on YouTube. I had interviewed him for Bull Moose Patrol, and we were talking just like this. And we were continuing. I said, "Well, Scott," with his French accent, I'm not going to do it any justice. He's like, "You're a romantic. That's what it is. You're a romantic." I was like, "I'm a romantic." I'll have to tell my wife that. I don't know if she knows, but I'm definitely, I think, nostalgic, or there's
Sure.
something about that stuff that just grabs me. And honestly, well, I mean, a bit of an admission. Well, I try and get out as much as I can, even for little bits, here and there after work on the weekends, and I try and be in the woods or on the water as much as possible. I am also, I'm an armchair outdoorsman in modern life, and day job and family don't allow for a lot of time. And so sometimes that stuff you see me post, that's me sitting there eating a sandwich at my desk at lunch, and I have a meeting coming up in an hour, and it's a little mental vacation. I grab a photo, I put a comment on there, I post it, I get a little chit chat going. And so I love reading, books on the subject, and following other great, blogs. And so that's what some of that's all about.
Yeah, I love it. For me too, especially both of us being in the Midwest, this podcast is listened to. It blows my mind sometimes the geolocations that I have listeners from, like Sri Lanka, Ukraine. There's Seychelles. There's people that listen to this podcast from all over, and it's easy to get, like, in my tunnel vision and just think, oh yeah, like he's up in Minnesota, right, or just over the border in Wisconsin. But we have people who listen from everywhere. Paint me a picture of like ideal canoe country, of like the Northwoods, the Boundary Waters, Maine. I guess where is ideal canoe country in your world? And, like, could you paint me a audio picture, I guess?
Oh man. Well, I guess I had to say, my heart is here in the Northwoods of, if I drew sort of a big oblong circle of, Northeast Minnesota, Boundary Waters, Superior National Forest, Quetico in Ontario, and then down through Northwest Wisconsin. So I do a lot of my weekend trips in Northwest Wisconsin. There's great stuff there that's 2 hours away from me. Fun adventure, woodsy places where you can get away. And not a lot of people are using those areas. There's state forest land. There's tons of county forest land. There's just a lot of really fun areas to explore. And then, of course, I love the Boundary Waters and the North Shore of Lake Superior. It's hard to get any better than that. It's fantastic. And up into Northwest Ontario, I mean, come on, you could spend your whole life paddling around, Quetico, Wabakimi, all the Crown land. It's absolutely phenomenal. So that's great. But I'll tell you, I love trying out new areas and exploring new stuff. And so Maine, I've done several canoe trips in Maine, and I absolutely love it. So the trips in Maine, maybe in a nutshell, a few things. It looks a lot like the Boundary Waters. You got a lot of coniferous environment, pine, spruce, fir, birch is in there. But Maine has some fantastic long rivers, and Maine has some great elevation. Mount Katahdin's 5,500 feet or something, and the coast of Maine is at sea level. So you have long rivers that run down from high elevation. It's in the Maritimes, so you get a lot of moisture coming off the sea there. And so you can do these fantastic long river trips. And you think Maine, you think, oh, like kind of rich East Coast tourist. Well, there are, but there's sort of down on the coast, and there's beautiful areas there, Acadia National Park and those types of areas. But you get up into what's called the Maine North Woods. That is, it's really interesting. People are like, well, what is it? Is that a state park? It's like, well, Baxter State Park is a massive state park, and it's by its charter, Percival Baxter, the governor of Maine who helped set it up, who was a wealthy shipping magnate, I guess, by its charter, it's deemed to be forever wild. So it's more like what we'd consider forest land, and it's a big wild chunk. But this Maine North Woods, my understanding at least, is that it is a lot of it's private, a lot of it's timber company land, but there's a long-standing agreement that it can be used by hunters, campers, canoeists, fishermen, people like that. So it does allow for access. And a lot of boundary folks are like, oh, it's logged, it's terrible, that can't be. But I'll tell you, Will, I mean, I've spent a month over the last 10 years canoeing Maine rivers. I've seen 3 other people that whole time. I mean, so, several hundred miles of river miles, and it was a group of 3 kayakers that we kind of ping-ponged with on the Allagash a couple of years ago in October. I've seen more moose on Maine canoe trips than I've seen people. So while I love the boundary waters and the very special protections of the boundary waters, it's a phenomenal place. Like I say, that's where my heart is. I've had some great experiences in northern Maine, and I love the lakes. There's something fantastic about the land of 10,000 lakes here in Minnesota and Ontario. But I like rivers. I love the moving water. I love the currents and the navigation and the whitewater paddling. I'm not like a playboat whitewater paddler by any means. So like when someone says whitewater paddler, I'm not the guy with the little banana boat crushing the Mountain Dews and doing NAR stuff or whatever. But like the wilderness tripping style whitewater paddling, I really love it. And part of that first Maine trip, as you say, is I was capture these romantic issues visions of poling I was reading about in old books. And so I went there, I wanted to learn. I'm like, I got to find someone who can show me how to do this. And so that was it. But, I've done the Allagash, the east branch of the Penobscot, the Machias, several shorter rivers. And those were all just really great trips. I'd happily go back and do all of them. And I tell you, so like you mentioned Far North Symposium. So I sit there and listen to a lot of folks from our region talking about these really awesome, epic trips, but they usually start with something like, well, we drove up to Winnipeg and then we drove further, and
sure,
it was 15 hours in the car, and then we had to hire a bush pilot to fly us in, and it was a lot of money, and then our trip began. Well, I can leave Minneapolis and fly into Bangor, Maine on a commercial flight and be there in a couple hours and be on a river in Maine in like 2 hours and not see anyone. So
you're selling it.
I really, I love it. I love it. I need to get back. Last time I was there was 3 years ago, I guess. So
that's awesome.
Looking forward to getting back, but maybe a couple other areas we talk about, very different. So I love the North Woods. I love, the piney forest and all that. Absolutely. And, the moose standing on the edge of the water. That's my vision of ultimate canoe trip. But I've done a couple Ozark trips the last few years. I just got back from the Buffalo River in northern Arkansas and led a group on the Current River in southern Missouri 2 years ago. Man, have you been down there?
I have not, but I have heard amazing things. I got a buddy who just did the Buffalo last year, and I've heard that the current is epic, like cliffs and just really beautiful.
They're great. They're beautiful, really beautiful in a different way than the North Woods. So you get these rocky cliff faces and bluffs. It's very hilly. It's hardwoods, but you'll go around bends, and both those rivers are just constant twists and turns. Not big white water, but lots of riffles, little chutes, rocky shoals that you're navigating around. You're constantly doing something. You're constantly steering, you're navigating. The water is crystal clear. You're in the canoe and you can look right down and see every pebble on the bottom, the rocky bed. You see a fish, you see the eyeball of the fish swimming by, and then you go around the bends, especially on the current, which is spring fed. You'll go around these bends and there'll be these turquoise pools, and you're like, where am I? This looks like something I'd see in Hawaii or Tahiti or something. And these springs that are bubbling out millions of gallons of water. And so I love them. And both those rivers, you can camp right on the river anywhere you want. You pull right up the Current River. So I took a group down there. We did 85 miles over the course of a week in like second week in October. We had those beautiful fall days. There's days where we had our shirts off, we're swimming, we're laying in the sun. There was mornings where we're bundled up with stocking caps on and frost in the water bottles. It was really sort of a perfect mix. We saw a couple people the first day, and like a church group the very last day, as we're about 5 miles from the takeout. Other than that, we spent the whole week with the river to ourselves. We'd paddle, and we'd kind of check our time. I'd be keeping track of mileage. We'd find a big rocky, shoal, pull up on, plenty of space, spread out, grab some driftwood for a fire, cool night, no bugs, just fantastic. So absolutely love the Ozark trips. Caveat, in the middle of the summer weekends, I think they're very busy. They're kind of party scenes, lots of those rivers, but there's something like 20 major rivers down there. I think they get a lot of use on summer weekends, kind of a party scene type stuff, but off season. So Buffalo is just there in the middle of spring. I left my house here in Minneapolis and had a knee deep snow in the front yard, got down to Arkansas the next day, and, is 80 degrees and the river is sunny. The water is fantastic. So that was great. And, one other area that so many. So
absolutely. It's never ending, but it's great. That's why we love it,
Yeah. Last summer drove out and did the Green River in Utah.
Oh,
the Canyonlands. And oh my gosh. I sound like very, very much like a Minnesotan right there. Oh my gosh. Oh, for heck.
Hey, you are.
Oh, don't you know? But man, it was, so I've hiked in the Grand Canyon, but this is like spending a week paddling through the Grand Canyon. It wasn't literally the Grand Canyon, but it was
isn't
absolutely beautiful,
amazing. So I did the Green for the first time, and this is the Green River in near Moab, Utah, is essentially a good reference point for folks to have an idea. And 2 canyons. The first one is Labyrinth Canyon, which runs through BLM land. And then the second one is Stillwater Canyon, which runs through Canyonlands National Park, like you mentioned. And I went down there and did it for the first time this last May. And, dude, amazing. I am sold on the desert canoe trips after that. It was like, it's just easy living, some of the most amazing, there's points where I felt like I was on Mars,
Yeah. Unbelievably beautiful. It's like I just keep telling myself, don't get used to this. Just keep swiveling your head and soaking it in and going through those canyons. It's the only thing on our trip. I joined a group out of Colorado that was primitive skills enthusiasts. And that's part of the reason I teamed up with them. I was like, okay, this will be fun. I'd really like to, tag along and see what I can learn from these folks. But we went in the summer. It was either end of July or early August. And you read the guidebooks, they'll say, don't go then. You can't go. It's too hot. But they're like, well, no, we do this every year. Yeah. So I went with them. I drove all the way out, and man, it was hot. It was every day over 100 degrees, and there's no shade. I learned after the first morning, I'd wake up, I'd lay there, and okay, get moving. First thing I do is get up, get packed up, break down my tent, pack everything up, because as soon as that sun got over the canyon walls and hit me, it went from 85 to 100 plus, just bang, just like that. And hot. And they'd had some heavy rains and flooding. And so the river was, it's a pretty silty brown river anyway, but it was very muddy, lots of dead carp in it. And the riverbanks were really muddy. Did you have really muddy riverbanks when you were there?
It wasn't too muddy. No, it was a little bit, but it must have been lower water, because we had there was some available sandbars to camp on, or not sandbars, but kind of in the slot canyon, so to say. There was sand that we would camp on. It wasn't as muddy, but hot. And I remember I was like I said, I think it was May, so not nearly as hot as had the heat of summer, but I was the only one who was just soaking in all of the sun. I felt like one of the lizards on the rock. All my other buddies, any opportunity we had to put the boat in the small sliver of shade next to the wall. They were like just dying for it. And meanwhile, I'm like in the stern of the boat, just barely hanging out in the sun, like, yes, baking.
Yeah.
That trip, absolutely amazing. The other one that I'd like to do that's high on the list in that kind of same vein, when I was speaking with Cliff Jacobson, he mentioned the Big Bend down in Texas as being one of his premier river trips. So I'd like to do that one as well.
I've heard great things about it from Cliff and some of the other folks who've gone down to the Rio Grande through Big Bend. It sounds fantastic. I absolutely want to do that. And the San Juan River in Utah is, I think, similar scenery, maybe not quite as dramatic as the Green, but the big difference is the river is maybe more interesting paddle, has some pretty good sized rapids on it. And both those, they're on the list for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that I'm interested in, being a canoe nerd, among many things, that I've never attacked but has piqued my interest, especially as of late, is canoe pulling. Talk to me about canoe pulling, as nobody, or as if I don't understand anything, have never heard of it. What is canoe pulling, and is it legitimate? Like a little background. Give me the rundown on pulling canoes.
Yeah, well, pulling canoe is standing in a canoe and using a long pole to push off the bottom to either push yourself up against a current or to be able to slow your descent going downriver. And it is an ancient practice, and anywhere where there's some type of boats, dugouts or punts or pirogues or canoes, and there's shallow water, you'll see people still this day. You look worldwide in a lot of like lesser developed countries, you'll see photos, your classic National Geographic type photos. There's people standing there with a bamboo pole or a wooden pole, and they're moving their boat through shallow water. And so it is legitimate. It's been used, around the globe. In the U.S., it's really, I view it as sort of a lost art. So it is something that was practiced more widely, and it's really kind of dropped off. And in the U.S., natives, of course, pulled their canoes in certain areas, and some of the early, missionaries or people like that were exploring areas, and some of the frontiers folk, people like that. But really, in like the Northeast, lumberjacks, lumbermen in New Brunswick and Maine, you see the old photos of them riding logs down the rivers with their long pike poles and cant hooks and things like that, and moving logs, and to be able to, the river drivers to dance on the logs. And as I've heard it explained, a lot of those lumberjacks in the off season would guide sports. So if you were a lumberjack in Maine and you had some rich person coming up from Boston or Philadelphia or New York, they didn't have roads through the woods. They didn't have ATVs. They didn't have outboards. They didn't have float planes. How do you get upriver to the great trout holes? Or if you're on the river, how do you hold so they can cast into that eddy or back up, or, get upriver to your camp? So it's a skill that developed with canoeists and really was a highly refined in the Northeast for moving up and down those shallow rivers that are pretty long rivers with, some rapids, but not a tremendous gradient. So you need a river, ideally that's not too deep and a firm type bottom that you can push off of. So I was kind of curious. Like I said, I'd read about it in old historical books. I'd seen old photos. Even you look at the covers of some old L.L. Bean catalogs from like the 40s or the 60s or whatever. There's photos of, illustrations or paintings of people pulling.
It's so odd to me that for whatever reason, me, a canoe enthusiast, only in the past like couple of years have I caught on or realized that I kind of do it intuitively without ever thinking about it, like I'll stand up and look for fish and just kind of push with my paddle. Or like you said, if I'm, going upriver, I'll stand up and kind of push, but not even putting two and two together, thinking that it's pulling, just instinctively doing it,
Yeah, right. Right. Well, I mean, it's very instinctive. I think probably everyone, if they don't have a too nice of a paddle, is pushed off the bottom at some point or pushed off, and so it can be pretty simple if you want to do it in moving water. Especially if you're trying to move upriver against a current, it does start getting kind of technical, and there is certainly an art and a skill to it, but it doesn't have to be. You can start pretty easy. My first experiences were on actually the shore of a lake, which is a great place to just get the feel of standing in the canoe and kind of wiggle woggle and get used to that feeling, kind of get your balance, get your sea legs. But when you get it down, I mean, it is fantastic. So you can end up having really fantastic control over your canoe. Now, there's great paddlers who will say, well, I have good control of the paddle, and they do. But it's like being able to plant your pole on the bottom of the river, and you can hold your canoe perfectly still in rapids. And maybe you're looking downstream and you don't like that chute that you're lined up with. Well, maybe you kind of twist your hips and you lean one foot downstream and you let the water wash against the hull, and you ferry yourself sideways a little bit and keep that pole out in front of you, and you can move yourself perfectly sideways to a different slot. You can back up, you can turn around, you can go upriver, you can go downriver, you can really do a lot. So there's a lot of reasons I like it. I like the technical skill and the challenge. It was just a great addition to my skill set. And I don't know that I'm really all that good at it. I'm probably advanced beginner or something like that compared to the old timers. But even at that, it's been really fun. Going upriver, it's a fun idea, and you can do it. It's a lot of work, and if you're just trying to muscle it, you're going to wear yourself out and you're not going to get very far. You really need to be able to control the bow and think about your trim. You move your weight backwards. It's almost like you're pulling a wheelie, and you really want to be using your body weight, not your arms. I mean, if you're just using your arms, you'll burn out immediately. So it's a lot of kind of getting the feel of it and then dropping your weight and using your core to push the canoe forward. So it's great, but it's also, it's fun to be able to mix it up. So just mentioned I was on the Buffalo for several days, the Current River. I'd say the Current, I was standing at least half the time, maybe 70% of the time. Buffalo something, but it's fun for me. I like mixing it up. So I solo like a full-size tandem canoe, and sometimes I'll sit in the seat. It's kind of casual going, and I'm just paddling along. If I kind of see ahead of me and look at the rapids or the stretch, sometimes I get on my knees, I go forward if I really want my weight low and I want that control. But often a tricky stretch, especially if it's shallower water and it looks like I might bottom out, or I'll actually jump up, put my paddle down, jump up and grab the pole. And also it's fun just to stand there. You get a completely different view. You're up high, you can see better. And I've had back injuries and knee injuries, and it's good for me to be able to move around instead of just sitting. I see people with tiny solo canoes where they're stuck in a kneeling position the whole time. I think, I don't know how you do it. Or kayaks.
I know.
Hey, I love it. I think it's great people get out and paddle, but just when I see someone sitting in a kayak all day, I think, man, that doesn't look nice. I like to do it. I can stand up, I can sit down, I can kneel, I can move around.
I'm the same exact way. I think the same thing. I'm like, hey, if you just took that kayak and cut a hole on the top, you could bring your fishing rod, you could stretch around.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. The poling thing, I got to try it. I'm definitely going to try and make one, or just have a pole. So how do you typically always bring a pole with you when you're paddling, or are you specifically poling particular rivers?
So sometimes if it's a lake trip, I don't bring a pole. Interestingly, a pole works pretty well in deep water. You can stand there and you can hold it with your thumbs together like a kayak paddle, and you can windmill that pole. And even though there's not a blade on there, you're getting 1.5 feet, 2 feet of that pole in the water with each of and you can move the canoe right along. So oftentimes in a river, you go around a bend, it'll get deeper and you can't really reach the bottom anymore. You just quick switch to that windmill kayak type stroke while you're standing. You move along really nicely. I mean, as fast as paddling, really. But I don't bring a pole on a Boundary Waters trip or a Quetico trip. I don't bring a pole if I'm out with my boy fishing on a lake or paddling around a lake. But a lot of river trips, I do bring a pole and I like to mix it up. And, we should get out. One area we haven't talked about, that's one of my favorites. I talked about northern Minnesota and northwest Wisconsin, which I spend a lot of time in. I spend a lot of time in the Driftless, bluff country, southeast Minnesota, western Wisconsin, upper Iowa River and northeast Iowa. I mean, that is a great area, beautiful area. So many fun rivers that all flow into the Mississippi, and a lot of those are really good poling rivers. So if you want to give it a try, that's where we should meet up and go. Like the Kickapoo, the Root River, the Upper Iowa River, the Cannon River. They're all really good for that.
Let's do it, man. Let's do that this summer. That would be a blast. I'd love that. And I always tell people, again, it's this podcast has more of a global reach than sometimes I remember. But I always tell people, and I think I remember speaking with you about this at the Midwest Mountaineering Adventure Expo, that the Driftless is one of the unsung heroes of, I think, of the U.S., but definitely of the Midwest. It's for those who don't know, it's a region in the Midwest where, and I could be wrong here, but to help me if I'm incorrect, but the glaciers didn't form in this area. So for whatever reason, the glaciers didn't flatten everything like the rest of the plain. So it's these big limestone bluffs and rolling hills, and it's all really small, almost Amish country type feel as well. And just amazingly beautiful. You would think that, there's rock climbing, there's trout fishing in the heart of Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois. It's just an amazing area.
Yeah, it is. You got it. You got it right. As far as I know, they call it the Driftless because the glaciers did not drift through and flatten everything out. And so you have these bluffs, limestone, sandstone, very hilly, twisty bends, and the Mississippi River, the mighty Miss runs right through the middle of it. And you have a lot of these rivers that drain into it, both, on the eastern edge in Wisconsin, Illinois, and the western edge, Minnesota and Iowa. And it's a beautiful area. Living here in the Twin Cities, we have great opportunities, up north, the air quote up north, because I've realized everyone's hardwired to think up north.
Sure.
But I spent a lot of weekends sneaking out down to the southeast, and it's not as heavily used. And there's really great outdoor recreation in that area. Beautiful, beautiful country.
Absolutely.
You paddled through it all in the Mississippi, right?
Oh yeah, it. That was one of my, and that's the reason why I say it's such an unsung hero. Even that's the story of the Mississippi in my mind as well. But that was one of my favorite sections, if not my favorite section of the river, just in terms of a beauty standpoint. Like going through wet Red Wing, Minnesota, and Winona, and all that area. It's just like this massive river cutting through this beautiful overlooking cliffs. Like I didn't know that existed in the Midwest until I'd been there.
That whole section, just what you said, all the way from Hastings, Minnesota, down to like McGregor, Iowa, Dubuque, Iowa, is absolutely beautiful. In fact, even in a car, I think maybe we talked about this, Will, but like Minnesota Highway 61 runs down the shore of the Mississippi there. I drive it every chance I get. It is a beautiful drive. It's fantastic. And, I'll hear people from here that they're going to Milwaukee or Chicago or something. And I'll mention that sometimes, like, oh, you should drive down 61 instead of the interstate. And they just look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what are you talking about? Like, look, it's like an hour longer, but if you time it during daylight, you're driving that in the morning when the fog is kind of burning off the Mississippi, and you might catch one of those big long trains going by or a barge. I mean, the whole Rivertown thing in culture there, I'm just in love with.
Yeah, you and me both, man. You and me both. How about some of the bushcraft and I don't know if bushcraft is the right term, but bushcraft and survival stuff. That's one of the aspects that I'm personally am not as into, but I have interest in. What do you find interesting about that stuff, or what type of stuff do you take with you on these river trips, as far as that world?
Yeah, I really like and enjoy that type of thing. And I think there's a couple different terms or, whatever categories they could fall into. I think for me, a part of it is the historical tie. You know, I love reading old outdoor books, and my background scouts. You look at the old scout books, the old scout field book, the old scout handbook, things like that from the early part of the 1900s. Is a lot of how to use an axe. And even when I went to summer camp for a couple of years, my first few years, is very different. We cooked all of our own meals over a fire. We had an axe yard in camp, and we lashed stuff. I mean, we were crazy about what scouts call pioneering. So we were always lashing gates and towers and kitchen apparatus. And they thought this is a good thing. And it was a great thing. You know, you're using your hands, you're learning knots, you're learning basic engineering. And so I always kind of did that stuff and liked it. Maybe before the sort of modern, I guess, the resurgence of bushcraft. We called it scoutcraft back then. You go back to older books, they call it, woodcraft. And it's part of what I really like about it is just that the real mechanical skills. Like I can hike in someplace and, rip the top off my freeze dried food and use the little canister stove and boil up some water and dump the hot water in there and eat it up and be happy if I'm on a great trip in a natural area. But it's different if I am finding wood that's dry wood. I'm thinking about where it's located, how it's standing, its exposure to the sun. I'm using a saw, maybe I'm using a hatchet to cut it, to split it. I'm using a knife to shave it. I'm lighting it. Maybe if I'm really just out there to have a good time and goof around, I'm making a friction fire with a bow drill, which is about the mechanical skill and understanding the wood and the tempo. And, and it's just a very rewarding experience. And the management of that fire, to be able to consistently get a nice, bright, clean fire burning and crackling, not the smoky thing where you're waving with a paper plate and blowing it on your hands and knees, and understanding the management of that, and maybe cooking in a reflector oven or right in the coals. It was one of the first nights of the Ozark trip. Sometimes I'd like to do stuff just to sort of, show off or introduce people to skills. But, I cooked my steak one of those nights just right on the coals, the fire. And people are like, what are you doing? You're going to eat that? I'm like, yeah, it tasted great. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. You got a fire going, nice bed of coals, laid the steak right down in there.
You don't no tinfoil or anything, just piece of meat
nothing.
on the coals.
You don't need it. And so there's a couple things, it's the simplicity of it. It's the old time skills, kind of the tie to how our ancestors live. I mean, you go far enough back, all of our ancestors, lived in caves. And so there's that tie. It's the minimalism. It's kind of the, I like trying to, I'm guilty of gear lust, like a lot of outdoors people. But what I try and do is refocus my energy towards skill lust and skill attainment or knowledge. And so instead of flipping through the catalog and dreaming about the next gadget or gizmo, to save a few ounces on my backpacking trip or something like that, I try and can I learn a new wild edible, or can I get better at recognizing these constellations for, celestial navigation, or, can I try out some different inner barks to make cordage, those types of things. And what I found is I always like sort of the outdoor adventure side of things, the human element, the adventure, how you paddle, doing a hard backpacking trip, all that stuff. I love it. And I still do. But I was, I didn't know much, honestly. I really didn't. I feel like I still don't in terms of what I'm looking at. I've heard people in the primitive skills world use the analogy of like the outdoors is almost wallpaper. It's just sort of a backdrop. And once I started really diving into the stuff and getting more interested into it and trying to learn, all of a sudden I was like, okay, what is the difference between a pine and a spruce and a fir? And, I hate to say it wasn't all that long ago. I couldn't really tell you much of a difference or consistently identify them, or next level, understand what have been some of their uses for food or medicine or tools or fire. And so all this stuff is fascinating. And a lot of it goes back. I've always been kind of interested. My dad was in the Air Force. I was born on an Air Force base, Vietnam era. And so I still have in my shelf over here, I've got lots of books in this area, but have his old Air Force survival manual. And I loved looking through that when I was a kid at the illustrations. And so I had a bunch of books like that, and I would look at them, but it took me a while to realize there's a big difference between looking at it and actually doing it,
Sure.
knowing how to do it. So I could describe, oh yeah, you make a figure 4 trap, or you could do this, or you could do that. Like, I've heard someone, explain it's like the difference between watching someone play the violin and being able to play the violin. So once I really started trying these things, then I realized, man, whether or not these are survival skills that I'm going to call on to survive, they are an interesting outdoor craft or skill in and of themselves. Like I mentioned, the bow drill, the friction fire. Well, I put that right up there with like learning how to cast a fly, or how to shoot well, or how to paddle a canoe, or photography. It is its own whole art form and craft, understanding the wood and how you craft it and the tempo of it and everything about it. It's fascinating. And one of the things I talk about sometimes is, so we go to these big expos, or, I mean, you've done some incredible trips. You've paddled the Yukon, you've paddled the whole Mississippi. That stuff is phenomenal, but it takes a lot of time, right? And sometimes these trips are a long way away. And a lot of the primitive skills, or the bushcraft skills, or the survival skills, and I kind of draw a line between those things. They're all interconnected, but in my mind, they're somewhat slightly different. It's a way of going a lot deeper, having a deep immersive experience without having to go far away at all. I could take my little boy to our backyard, or to the park that's 5 minutes away, and we can try and identify some plants. We can try and find some natural materials. We can find a down dead birch log and cut off the bark and make a bowl or a dipper out of it, or those types of things. So
Right.
I like it for a lot of these reasons. I like it for the history, the anthropology. I like it for the craft. It feels like a more immersive experience. When I actually teach wilderness survival, I'm very much about upfront. People should learn pragmatic, no nonsense, easy to use stuff. Stack the deck in your favor in case the chips are down. Because what's going to lead to a survival situation? It's not this sort of romantic, I parachute out, or my shipwrecks, I'm on a desert island and I'm fully functioning. It's like, no, you might be sick, you might be hurt, you might be badly cut. Nightfall caught you because the trip took longer than you expected. You're lost, you're panicked. So I am all about like modern techniques and making things very easy for like a real world pragmatic survival situation. But those traditional skills, or those primitive skills where you are using the natural material, those could be additive. They could help, and they certainly give you more confidence and more of a comfort level, I think.
I love it, man. And I think I'd like to transition more towards that because it's something in my own tripping that I think is lacking. Like you said, I have all this interest, but I can't tell you the difference between this tree and that tree, or why an animal would hang out underneath this tree. But I liken it kind of to I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I guess I would say to like my awakening to hunting. It was like as a kid growing up, my dad was a fisherman, and I've always been a fisherman, and I've loved to fish. It's in my blood. If there's a body of water there, I was fishing today. I took the canoe out for a little bit. But
How'd you do?
I was okay. I caught two or three little bluegill and two little small largemouth. So better than nothing.
Okay. Yeah.
But oh yes, okay. So it's akin to before I was hunting, or when I was fishing, and before I was hunting, I would hike, backpack, canoe, and you're kind of you're just traveling through, right? Every animal in that area knows that you are in there, within a 5-mile span. Everything knows
Right.
that this big bad human is, rolling through, being loud, blah, blah, blah. And then when I started hunting, I realized that if I just sit perfectly still, I can watch the woods come to life around me in a way that I've never seen by just backpacking or mountain biking or canoeing, And I think that kind of an extension of that, but maybe like a slightly different path, is like what you're talking about, is having some more of those primitive skills and understanding what wood is good for this fire, because intuitively I already do some of that, but to taking it to the next step, I think can really enrich the experience like you're talking about.
Yeah, I found it to be so. And I think a lot of people who've done some of the trips, even so I'm real big if I'm leading a trip on, I think it's very important to understand and get out upfront what the objective is. Okay. Because there's a certain group of people who are like endurance athletes in the woods. And I know a lot of those people from kind of my sports background. So what they want to do is they want a hard physical challenge. That's what they want. Okay. That's what they're looking for. Like, I want to, I heard someone got down this trail and back in 2 hours. Let's see if we can do it in an hour and a half. All right. And then I have friends who are very much like bird watcher, naturalist, much more so than I am, and more patient, kind of gentle souls, and,
Yep.
and so you don't want to mix those people. And then there's certain people, like what they want is they want a group event where, hey, it's sort of, we're cutting loose and we're having a good time. And this is more of like a fun party. And then there's people who are interested in skill attainment and acquiring it. Anyway, so getting the objective out up front is important. And but so I guess what's getting with that is a lot of times when I'm leading a trip where it's, expedition might be a bit of a grandiose term, but a week-long trip or something where you have a time and distance constraints. So you can't necessarily goof around all the time on something like that. Like you have to be a certain place at a certain time, and there's a schedule, and you're there to enjoy the trip. But also oftentimes you're kind of physically fatigued, if you're backpacking in the mountains or you're canoeing. And so the first objective is, hey, let's make sure the trip's running smoothly and we're moving along at a pace that we're supposed to be, and we're getting fed and hydrated, and we're sleeping, and everything's being taken care of. But on those types of trips, I really do like to try and work in small elements. I view myself, I'm sort of a pragmatist. And so even if they're using more of a modern approach, hey, we're backpacking or we're canoeing, I'll often bring the reflector oven and bake in front of a fire. And people are amazed when you're cranking out, fresh hot cookies or cinnamon rolls or something from a crackling fire in the reflector oven. Or, hey, a bow drill set doesn't weigh hardly anything. I'll often bring that along and let people play around with that, or even just, introduce some basic, knife skills working with wood. And so, yeah, a lot of that's fun. It really adds to the experience.
What are some of the, you mentioned a handful of them there, and maybe those are the main key ones, but what are some of the, like the things that people resonate most with who maybe haven't, dipped their toes in that world as much?
Well, a few things. And some of these things, are they bushcraft or not? I don't know. I'm not sure who's writing the rules on this, but I'll tell you one thing that I've noticed. I like knots, okay? And I'm not like a master knot tire, but I know quite a few, and I've done it a lot. And this definitely goes back to my scout days, and I've learned more. If you are good with knots, your camp life can be a lot more comfortable. You can string up a nice tight tarp, even if there isn't the perfect layout with trees. Maybe you're putting a pole in there and running lines out from that, and you can get your bear bag up, or you can just do a lot of things. You can do some basic campcraft and lash things together where maybe you're not having to chop and hack everything up. You can do a lot. I've heard another survival instructor use the phrase, knots are your hammers and nails in the outdoors or in a survival situation. But the other thing is, like, it's almost like I'm putting on a magic show. And it's like, I just do this because I've done it so many times. A lot of people kind of stand there and watch me. They're like, what are you doing? How do you do that? I tie a trucker's hitch, and I'm tying knots with, quick releases and things like that. And I'll often have people like, and some of these people have come on a lot of my trips. And it's like, okay, I am a big fan of getting a good tarp over the kitchen area, a good dining fly. And so that's always one of my objectives. And they just know, like, okay, let's see Scott go to work on this. How is he going to set it up this time? So, I think knots are a basic one, whether you want to be a survival person or a bushcraft person, or, hey, you're just an outdoors person. Learn a few good knots. You'll learn how to join some ropes, learn how to make a loop. Adjustable and tensioning knots, like a taut line hitch, trucker's hitch, very, very valuable. Learn how to tie your knots on a quick release or slippery so you can break down camp really quickly. That's a big one. We're both canoeists. We both love canoeing. I am a fan of traditional paddling strokes. So I'm not going to argue if you're out there to make time and cover distance and crush miles. The bent shaft paddle and the sit and switch where you do a couple strokes on one side, flip over the other. That's a great way to cover distance, and it works. But to me, it's kind of it lacks sort of the refinement in the artistry.
I'm with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up, I just taught my dad strict old school Red Cross style J stroker. So I've got that. And then I've kind of, at least my own version, I think I'm doing it, but the Canadian stroke, and then like the Northwood stroke from Maine, or what they call it, the Maine guide stroke. And so I love that, where you're coming back, you have your correction, then you're slicing that forward edge underwater and getting your recovery that way. And
I
so
do love that one. The other one, not to cut you off, but the other one that I find myself doing all the time, and I'm not entirely sure the correct term of it. Maybe you can help me. I want to say it was maybe the Indian stroke or something, maybe not BC anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Where you come forward and then you rotate the paddle on the palm of your hand. Oh man, that stroke just feels so amazing.
It's great. It's great. And sometimes someone might actually watch you if they say like, what's he doing there? How's his paddle never even leaving the water? And you're just slicing that blade edge forward underwater. So, I love that stuff. I think fire skills right there. So, I mean, it's very basic. There's lots of ways to light a fire. Many, many people, accidentally light fires. But hey, man, also I've noticed a lot of people struggle with it, and they struggle even under good conditions. So practice lighting your fire. I mean, really encourage it. It's primal. I mean, almost everyone enjoys sitting around a fire. It's the caveman TV. It can be a lifesaver. So if something does go wrong, there is an accident, you're behind schedule, who knows what? I mean, fire can do so much for you. It can heat you, it can dry you. The flames can be a signal at night. The smoke can be a signal during the day. You can cook your food. You can purify your water. It can, scare away predators. The smoke can keep bugs away. You can make a fire bed with the coals. You can use the coals to burn out wood to make a bowl. Fire is an incredible tool in an emergency situation. It's awfully enjoyable just in a regular camping situation. And I think there's a whole lot of, I'd say bushcraft or woodlore knowledge that comes in really being skillful at lighting and managing a fire. And part of that, being able to understand the wood, selecting the wood, using your wood's tools well, a saw and a knife can really help a lot to get to dry wood in the inside of a wet log.
What are your overarching, maybe a few key things for fire, for campfire, for most people? If someone's going to come to you and say, I know how to make a fire, you say, okay, keep these things in mind.
Oh yeah, well, right. So there's a lot of ways you could take this, or you can keep it real simple. I think the basics, which you often hear described, is tinder, kindling, and fuel. So think about your materials that you're going to burn and grading them into different categories. Okay, and tinder being very fine, fluffy, small material that's either natural material like dried grass. That's one that I see people overlook a lot, but you can get clumps of dry grass, especially get the stalks out there, and you can rough it up and make a big ball. That can make good tinder. Cattail fluff, inner bark of cedar bark, inner bark of cottonwoods and willows, all that. You kind of get that. If you find a dead log, break it off and ruffle that up. That makes great tinder. Birch bark torn into strips or scraped into a fluff. So there's a lot of natural materials that can catch a spark and start the fire. And then you want very fine, thin, dry sticks, and you work your way up larger and larger. So think about grading from the smallest and the finest with the most surface area per material to the larger stuff. And it's like when you have a little spark, that's like a little baby, and a little baby fire needs baby food. So you add it, you don't feed a baby a big, huge chunk of meat, right? You feed it soft baby food. So starting that way, the tinder, and most people I observe do not collect enough tinder. They walk around the woods. If they're not used to lighting fires, they're not used to camping, they're not real familiar with the outdoors. Say, okay, we're going to make a fire. They'll kind of walk around and they'll see some rotteny looking dead log on the ground. They drag that over the fire pit and they get 3 or 4 of those and okay, we're good to go. And it's like, no. You need a nice amount of tinder. Get yourself a generous amount, twice as much as you think you need. The fine kindling, the very fine, thin, lower branches of spruce, or maybe you're splitting stuff to get that, or you're finding that you need like 2 or 3 times as much as you think you need. You want a lot of that because that's what's going to give you that ignition and the nice bright hot flames that'll get the next levels going. And then you worry about the bigger stuff. So getting the right materials, and there's a lot to do there, but of course you want it to be dead, you want it to be dry, and getting the surface. I think in terms of building the fire, lots of different ways you can set up a fire. My favorite technique, which I think is universally the best technique for setting up a fire, is I learned it from the U.S. Air Force instructors. It's what they call a platform embrace. So lay something down on the ground first. And I never did this before, but lay down a series of sticks parallel, or a slab of bark, or a couple big sticks. So you're building your fire up off the ground. So you're not on that wet, cool, damp ground. You've built a platform, and then the brace runs perpendicular to that. And that can be a bigger log or a rock or something like that. And that gives you a little space there where you can put your tinder, and then you can lay sticks at a slant on there, and they're not going to crush the tinder, because we need heat for the ignition, and we need airflow, and we need fine fuel to get this fire going. And a lot of times people kind of crush their tinder. You'll see in many, many books, and old books and survival books and scout books and stuff like that, the teepee fire, make a little teepee and put your tinder in the middle. That works. And when it works very well because the heat's all funneling up, but it's very futzy. It takes a while to stack up all the sticks nice and evenly. It's a lot of monkeying around. And what happens very often is that little bit of tinder in the middle burns out and it doesn't fully ignite the teepee. So I very much prefer lay down your raft, have a bigger piece that's perpendicular, set your tinder next to that perpendicular log, light the tinder, and then take a good amount of the fine kindling. And you want it like a lot of people, they take like one stick at a time, they lay it on there. No, put them together like you opened up a box of spaghetti. You've got all the spaghetti together, all running parallel, okay, and hold it together. And then you gently kind of hold it over that tinder and lay it on that brace and over the tinder so it doesn't smush it. And if it's smoking, if it's kind of sputtering, you can lift up that brace log and let a little airflow in there. And once the flames are really crackling through, then you put the next layer on and put it at a bit of an angle. So that's the way I like to teach. Like I say, other ways work, of course, but I think that's what I found to be the best way.
Well, I'm glad I asked, because that totally makes sense. I'm going to start doing all my fires that way. I've essentially done that, but I've never put the raft or the platform below it in order to get more air below, which totally makes sense.
It helps a lot. It keeps you off the damp ground, the cool ground. It allows for airflow. It prevents your fire from getting squished. And you're building the fire as you go, instead of trying to build this masterpiece with the tinder inside, then lighting it. So you're building it. You're lighting the tinder, then you're quickly putting the fine kindling on, and you're stacking up there. Maybe just one or two other things that I think I really like. Carry multiple ways to light the fire. Lighters are great. Waterproof matches. Make sure they're high quality waterproof matches. Always have something on you. Multiple sources. I've got these things laying all around them, holding up an orange Bic. Oftentimes I'll put orange duct tape around there and some cord. I really like putting orange on my stuff. The duct tape can be peeled off and shredded. That makes a great tinder. But I really, the simplest, best, easy, man-made tinder. So I like people to always practice finding natural tinders so they get used to that and they get good at it. Helps them identify it, but always, always, always carry some man-made tinder and fire starter with you for that emergency situation. So you're stacking the deck in your favor. And Vaseline soaked cotton balls, I think, are the simplest. They're very cheap. Oftentimes on trip, I'll bring a big bag of, make sure they're real cotton balls, not synthetic ones, and a big tub of petroleum jelly and some baggies. Waterproof cases were great. Get a whole bunch of cotton balls, goop them up in Vaseline, put them in there. You've got some Vaseline then for when your lips are dry or your knuckles are cracked or for any number of things. It's can serve a multitude of purposes. But you take one of those cotton balls, you sort of pull it apart, fluff it up, put it down there, and you light it. It'll burn. It'll burn like crazy with that Vaseline on there. And that's it weighs nothing. It's very, very cheap. Wonderful fire starter to outfit a group with. I do
the Vaseline cotton balls now as well. The first time I did that was on my Mississippi trip, and I think I just read it somewhere online. I was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. I could not believe how well and how long the Vaseline makes that cotton ball burn. Yeah, I think it's the ultimate fire starter.
It does. And, if you take a little piece of foil, if it's a challenging situation, you think it might be trouble, you take a little bit of aluminum foil or a chip bag or the bottom of a pop can or something like that, and you put that Vaseline cotton ball in there, it'll burn twice as long because it becomes like a little oil lamp where it'll keep going in there even. Mm-hmm.
There you go. Next level. Two more things for you, and I slowly start to wind it down. But let's see. I just lost the one question that I wanted to ask you. So I'll go to the other one I had. Winter camping. That's another one of those that I see that you're interested in and that you like doing that is often overlooked. What do you get out of winter camping? And I guess start there.
Yeah, I love it. It's definitely one of my passions. And what do I get out of it? Well, I'm an outdoorsy guy. I love my time outdoors. And if you live here in Minnesota, you got to find something to do in the winter. Otherwise, you're going to be shut down for at least half the year. But it's beautiful out there. First of all, I mean, you got to, North Woods of Wisconsin, you get in the Boundary Waters or Northern Maine in the winter. It is fantastic. It's very scenic. It's very pretty. There's no bugs. The bears are asleep. Most of the people are out of the woods. So very little traffic. You don't necessarily have to go that far for it to feel like a big adventure when you're winter camping. Kind of back to, I suffer a bit of a time poverty issue like a lot of people do. And so I'm big on kind of micro adventures and the weekend adventures. And while I love the grand trips, winter camping, I don't have to go far at all. I can go to a local state forest that might get a fair amount of use in the summertime and no one will be there in the winter. So the beauty, the scenery, but I will say I view that as really the thinking person's version of camping. Winter camping done well, it's like a chess match. You need to be thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead. Things take longer in the cold. You have to be careful you're not overheating. The environment is much less forgiving. It's tougher to move around. You don't want to be moving fast and get sweated up. Lots of times things are frozen. Your food's frozen, water's frozen, so stuff takes longer. You have less daylight. So you really kind of need to be there's an art and a science to it. And so I do enjoy that. I don't like being cold. I'm not a masochist. I hate being cold. You were talking about hunting, when I was young, I had frozen feet so many times sitting in a tree stand and cold fingers, bow hunting late season or ice fishing or something like that. I hate it. But I'm rarely cold when I'm winter camping, very rarely cold. Maybe once in a while my hands are cold for a moment while I'm transitioning from one thing to another. Or maybe there's a moment when I'm getting ready for bed and getting out of my clothes in my sleeping bag or vice versa in the morning. But it's fun. It's a cool experience. I love taking groups out winter camping, making sure they're prepared, teaching the techniques. This is what you need. This is how we're going to dress. This is how we're going to eat. This is how you're going to manage your body. This is how we're going to build a sleep system. And I know that when people go back, Monday morning, they're bragging rights at the water cooler when they get to say, yeah, I slept outside. And people are like, what? And they're like, yeah, it's 10 below, it's 20 below, it's 30 below. And really, I love sleeping under the stars in the winter. So I have the hot tent with a little wood burning stove. That's luxurious. It's like a portable cabin. It's so much fun. It's a great way to go winter camping. Do a lot of snow shelters, the Quincy's with scouts. That's a great way to do it. It can be warm. It's fun to build those. But as much as anything, at least half my nights winter camping are simply laid out,
really?
Under the stars. Yeah, I really like it. You do it right. You understand what you're doing, understand what you need, sleeping bag wise and gear wise. You're not cold. It's fun.
So what's your, I was going to ask what a typical winter camping setup for you would look like. Are you base camping or are you hot tenting? But talk me through just sleeping out under the stars. You sleeping bag, you have your,
so you pick a spot. And you lay down, you close your eyes, you go to sleep. No, it is. So I've spent several years. The Boy Scouts the Scouts have a wonderful base up in the Boundary Waters where they guide canoe trips all summer long, and then they run winter camping programs. And so I went through their cold weather leader program about 10 years ago. Then I returned for many years as an instructor. And one of the things I like is they really differentiate. They use the term sleep system, because one thing is a lot of scouts, a lot of youth, they don't necessarily have a lot of money. They're not able to go to the sporting goods store and pay $800 or $1,000 for like a 40 below mountaineering, high loft down sleeping bag. Those are luxurious. They're wonderful. I'm not knocking them at all, but oftentimes we have to think about how do we outfit them and make sure they're safe and they're comfortable on a budget. That's kind of another one of my passions. But so what we do, my sleep system often have a tarp. So it starts there, like just one of your plastic poly tarps. So you have something to keep you from getting wet with slush and snow. That's on the ground. You're sleeping on ice, sleeping on the ground, or often either packing down an area or scraping the snow away and making a nice area with a little bit of a windbreak. And there's different things you can do there. Tarp goes down, and then sleeping pads. So insulation from the ground, you have a lot of conductive heat loss to the ground. And a lot of times what we're doing is we're using a sled to pull stuff in so you can bring a bit more bulk with you. You don't necessarily want a ton of weight, but the closed cell foam pads, like those cheap blue ones, they're not the best, but they're okay. Or like the closed cell ridge rest pads. And you really want at least 2 of those. Sometimes we're doing 3, or maybe 2 of those with like a Thermarest pad. So those are stacked up. One of the things I like to bring is if you go to like any convenience store or whatever, the Mylar sheets that you can put in your car window in the summer to reflect the heat, they've got just a little bit of foam. And they've got that shiny Mylar space blanket material. You can buy them for a couple bucks. I always bring one of those. I put that between my pads. It adds a tiny amount of insulation, but it also helps, I believe, with the radiant heat loss because it has that reflective shield. If space allows, I'll often bring a wool blanket, and I'll have that sort of folded over on top of my pads, and then 1/3 that I can lay out on top that tarp. So that's kind of my front porch where I can change my boots and lay my clothes. So my bare skin isn't touching that plasticky tarp. And then right before I go to bed, I fold that. So I have like a triple layer of wool blanket. And I'm usually wearing thick wool pants and a wool sweater or 2. I take those off at night. Those go on top of the blanket and on top of the pads. So you going from the ground up, you got a tarp for moisture protection, a couple foam pads, that Mylar auto windshield in there, wool blanket that's folded into 3rds for protection there, usually thick wool pants, wool sweater, and then sleeping bags. And even now, even though I do this all the time, my best winter sleeping bag is like a 0 degree rated bag. I don't have a 20 or 40 below sleeping bag, but that bag goes inside another mummy bag. So 2 mummy bags doubled up, like a 0 degree bag and a 20 degree bag. And I'll have those one inside the other. And when I'm sleeping outside, especially because you have to worry about convection and wind chill, you can buy a pretty good Gore-Tex bivy bag that's part of the Army sleep system, the military sleep system. So it's this big camouflage bivy bag. Those sleeping bags go inside of there. Another military item is something
Sounds
called
hot.
Well, when it's 20 or 30 below, it's your body's pumping out 100 degrees all night long, and you need to capture as much of that as possible. There's a pretty big differential between that and 20 below 0. So you get inside of there, and then sometimes inside the sleeping bag, some people like hot water bottles. I tend not to do that. I find it just doesn't add that much for me. On the few nights when I've been cold, it feels like, okay, I'm hugging a warmish water bottle. It's not like it makes me magically warm all over, but a lot of people like a warm water bottle. One of the things I really do like is I'll bring this thin military poncho liner or a fleece blanket, but I don't try and lay it out evenly over me. That doesn't do much. I bunch it all up, all around my chest and my neck to really fill in those gaps. And keeping your core very warm helps a lot. It's remarkable, but your body will shut down blood flow to the extremities if it senses that your internal organs are having a heat challenge. So you got to keep your core nice and warm, and that keeps pumping blood flow onto your fingers and your toes.
Have you ever had any challenges, or like any times you've woken up in the middle of the night like this could be bad?
Yeah, I've had a couple. Not recently winter camping, and I've been on some really cold nights. Oftentimes, you want to go to bed warm. You warm up the sleeping bag; it doesn't warm you up. So we'll do a night hike, or you shovel snow to build up your snow kitchen or your shelter, or you saw some wood. Oftentimes, I'm even doing like some deep knee bends and jumping jacks and stuff to get my heart rate up. So usually, I get into bed, I'm nice and warm. I'll fall asleep right away. Very common. I'll tell this to people because it's important to know what to expect. I'll often wake up feeling pretty chilled and cold about 12:31 in the morning, and I have to take a leak, and you got to do it, because you sit there and trying to hold that all night, you're gonna be cold and miserable. A lot of people like using a bottle that they bring into their bag or their shelter with them, and they relieve themselves in there. I've tried it there again. It just feels like I'm a big guy. I don't fit very well in my sleeping bag anyway. And so I just kind of after wrestling with it for a minute, I'm like, do it. I just get out of my bag, and I slip into my boots quick, and I run away, and I go number one, and then I get back in my bag, and I sleep like a baby the rest of the morning. But I'll tell you, the couple times I've been really cold is when I've been caught off guard, when it's been like spring or fall.
Sure.
And I haven't been. So have you paddled the Bois Brule in Northwest Wisconsin?
I have not.
Absolutely beautiful. Beautiful. You got to do it. I love it. I try and get there every year for like day trip type stuff, but there's a camp up there. I was camped right on the shore of Lake Superior. And this was 2 years ago. So I had a decent sleeping bag. I was in a tent. I was not expecting a winter camping experience. I woke up so cold because in the middle of the night, the cold air was coming off Lake Superior, and it got really windy. So, there's been a few situations like that where I've gotten really cold. Yeah. I'm digging in my pack. What else can I stuff in my sleeping bag or put on? And,
Hey, man, I appreciate the time. I'm going to wind her down, but I've learned a lot, and I like it's always good broadening the horizon. I've taken a few things. I'm definitely going to I want to try and get better at, identifying the surroundings and just doing some of the natural things. And I'd like to get into winter camping as well. Might as well, right? It's
you bet.
It's just another thing to add to the repertoire when it's cold outside and you're stuck inside and there's nothing else to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have time for a question coming from me?
Please, absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I think I may have heard a bit about this, but you mentioned, your start. You mentioned a canoe camp. Were you a Camp Manitowish guy? Or
correct.
What was your
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So as a kid, I went to Camp Manitowish in northern Wisconsin. That was really where it all started for me. I was lucky enough that my folks sent me up there, and we would do, it was basically your typical sleepaway camp, but they would do a big focus on canoeing and canoe tripping up in northern Wisconsin. So started off with 2-3 day canoe trips as a younger kid, and eventually working up through middle school and high school to longer and longer trips. And I think 3 trips that I did in high school were the ones that kind of stuck with me. I did a 14-day sea kayaking trip in Georgian Bay, Lake Huron. A 30-day trip when I was 16, I believe. A 30-day trip in Saskatchewan, a canoe trip. And then the capstone would have been the 45-day backpacking trip in the Brooks Range of Alaska.
Wow.
And
incredible.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. And really lucky to have been able to go on that stuff. And because my family wasn't, like I said, my dad liked to fish, and we would, go on fishing trips every once in a while, but, and they like to hike and be outside, but I've never been on a camping trip still to this day, really, with my family.
Right.
I've never slept in a tent with my mom and dad or brother and sister, even though it's my passion. So, those things that I remember the trip in Saskatchewan. That one was like an eye-opening trip for me as a 16-year-old kid. Like, holy cow, this is out here and like accessible to everybody. And then the backpacking trip in the Brooks Range, like, set it in stone. Like, holy cow, this is amazing. This is like, it just spoke to me, I guess.
Yeah, that is amazing. That is amazing. I passionate wilderness enthusiast. I read a lot about it. I do a lot of stuff. I've taken a lot of classes, but that length of time is not something I've done. And at this phase in life, it's not really available to me, but maybe 10 years out or something like that, I look forward to that 30-day or 45-day type immersive experiences. I can only imagine. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I've heard great things about that camp. I thought you had mentioned I've paddled quite a bit over in that area, the Boulder Junction area and the Northern Highland, and there's some nice canoe routes and trails over there. But I didn't know your history. That's cool.
Absolutely. Hey, and one more thing too before I let you go. You mentioned the reflector oven several times. That's a tool that I've never busted out. Give me a rundown on the reflector oven.
Yeah, reflector oven. So it's usually made out of sheet metal, kind of angled like that with a shelf in the middle. And you set it next to the fire, and you can bake in there. So you look at old, I've seen online, like colonial historical reenactment villages. Oftentimes, I guess, early Americans would have reflector ovens in their homes that they'd put on the hearth of their fireplace, and that's how they'd bake. Certainly, we talked about lumberjacks. It's an old lumber tradition. It was up on the Allagash in Maine. You can see old logging museums of these great big reflector ovens. And, they make big long fires and put the reflector oven in front of there. It's a wonderful tool. There's just a few things to know, and it works best with a bright, hot fire. So there again, back to the fire skills. If you oftentimes when you're cooking on fire, you want coals and you want a bed of coals. But with the reflector oven, what you really kind of want is those dancing flames coming up in front of the reflector oven. So it's often you want a nice supply of finely split dry wood, twigs, kindling, stuff like that, and building up kind of a tall fire. And you want that reflector oven, pretty close in front of it. Anything that you'd bake at home, you can make in the reflector oven. I know people that cook lasagna and stuff like that in there, but certainly, things like cinnamon rolls, cookies, bannock is of course a classic. And so you can have a special reflector oven that was made. There's ways you can make them out of foil. You could actually use cookie sheets together like that, maybe some foil on the side. So there's some ways you can improvise it. You can actually use a pot. So if you have a large pot, you can sit it next to the fire. And if you find a pan that fits right in there, you can effectively use a cook pot or a billy pot to work like a reflector oven. So yeah, just give it a try. I mean, bannock mix costs almost nothing, flour, salt, some water, play around with it, give it a try. Tubes of cookie dough I bring on lots of trips. It's kind of cheating, but no one's complaining when I'm whipping out the fresh hot cookies. So bring a tube of cookie dough on your next trip. And whether you get an official, the really nice ones, there's a guy in Sweden who makes a collapsible reflector oven. That's really nice. It's lightweight. It folds down. Svante something, I think is his name. I'm forgetting it right now, but that's a great one. If you hunt around like on eBay or Craigslist, there used to be people that make like collapsible ones like the Scouts. And there's some ones that are not collapsible. So my trips in Maine, man, the Allagash trip we did with Chip and Lanny, Chip Cochran, Lanny Love out of Allagash Canoe Trips. And that guy put on a masterful campfire cooking
Love it.
display that whole trip. I mean, pouring rain, cold conditions, a big group. It was like a floating bed and breakfast. It was absolutely amazing. And part of what made it was fresh, hot baked goods every morning and every night. So it wasn't like this kind of you dance around and, oh, here's a piece of fish and I'm going to do some more. Here's one pancake. No, we had a big group, like 15 people. Everything was ready, like a restaurant. Okay, breakfast is on. You'd show up. There'd be a pan, full cookie sheet size pan of blueberry muffins or chocolate cake at night with frosting or cookies, cornbread.
Love it.
Strawberry shortcake. So they make biscuits and then fresh strawberries. And there's just something about that, good food on a trip goes a long way. And there again, maybe kind of back to those old time skills, like really baking fresh food like that. It just takes it to another level in terms of recharging your body and how you feel when you're out there. So yeah, the reflector oven's a lot of fun. Doesn't weigh much. Dutch oven's great, right? Dutch oven's incredible. You can do great things with Dutch oven, but they weigh a ton.
Yep.
So the reflector oven doesn't weigh much.
And I like the other thing that I like, at least in theory, without having done it yet. You mentioned the Dutch oven. Yeah, I take Dutch ovens, but you're right. It weighs a lot. It's always worth it when I take it, but I don't always take it, partly because of the weight. And also, it's just, you have to dedicate time to just that. Whereas it seems like with the reflector oven, it's like if you have a campfire, you can make some cookies.
Yeah, usually you're kind of doing something else. You do
Right.
need to keep your eye on stuff, and you probably need to rotate it. Some of the reflector ovens, you can actually open up the back so you can access the pan from the back, so you're not, having to. Mine usually I'm just kind of pulling them away from the fire,
Right.
check it, how's it doing, turn it around. There's a fellow in this area, Don Cavellis, who makes the stoves for the winter camping tents, and he's really a genius when it comes to like wood burning stoves and things like that. And he told me, well, they don't reflect all. There's nothing about reflecting. It's basically just capturing the hot air and the radiant heat.
Sure.
But whatever it is, they work,
Works.
and it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Hey, Scott, where can we find out more about you? I know you got the Bull Moose Patrol. Is that the best place to keep up to date with what you got going on?
Yeah, bullmoosepatrol.com is the website. We've got a lot of stuff there, a lot of trip reports and ideas for people and skills and gear reviews and things like that. I'm most active on Facebook, actually. So there's a Bull Moose Patrol page on Facebook, and that's probably the best place. So you can always go to bullmoosepatrol.com. My email's there, phone number's there. If you want to, sign up for a class, I have a series of wilderness survival classes coming up, or a canoe trip, things like that. Get in touch with me there. But the Facebook page that's kind of where I'm most active, when I'm checking daily and sharing content and things like that.
Awesome. Sounds good. Hey, well, Scott, enjoyed the conversation, man. And I'd love to be able to get up to the Driftless and do some canoe pulling maybe this summer if it works out. It'd be great.
Yeah, you bet. I appreciate the opportunity. This is a lot of fun. Let's do it.
And there you have it, episode 46 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors with Scott Oath. You can find Scott at bullmoosepatrol.com or his Facebook group, Bull Moose Patrol. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, whatever it is, subscribe. That makes sure that you will get the latest episodes every time they drop. We do 2 a month on the first and third Friday of every month, new episode. So subscribe. That helps us out a lot. BuffaloRoamer.com if you want to find out more. Go get some fresh air. Go for a hike, paddle, whatever it may be. Go enjoy it. Talk to you soon.